It's 1965, 13 years before the iconic episode of the dating show The Dating Game was filmed. Morgan Rowan, a shy 13-year-old, has just moved with her family to North Hollywood. Now she attends a Catholic school while adjusting to her new life in California. One night, Morgan is hanging out with a friend at her favorite hangout, the Hullabaloo Club, a popular nightclub known for attracting top celebrities. While they're standing in the parking lot waiting to hear the bands, Morgan notices two older guys watching them and smiling. Her friend points at her and says, "That's Rod." Rod was tall, attractive, and charismatic. He seemed to have a magnet for women. After a few minutes of flirting, staring, and laughing, Rod invites them over. However, Morgan's friend decides to walk away, hoping to meet someone else. Morgan, intrigued and captivated by Rod, decides to stay. What she didn't imagine was that this moment would mark a drastic turn in her life, changing her forever. Without hesitation, Rod grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to an alley behind the club. There, he brutally beat her, smashing her head against the wall until she was unconscious. When Morgan regained consciousness, she felt a suffocating pressure on her chest. Rod had pushed a garbage container against her, immobilizing her. Still stunned and in pain from the blows she received while she was unconscious, she noticed that Rod was no longer there. She took advantage of that moment to free herself, ran to the door of the club and called for help. The owner and his wife helped her, and from that day on, Morgan decided to stay away from Rod forever and keep what had happened a secret. Traumatized by what had happened, Morgan decided to bury that dark episode and try to move on with her life. At the end of August 1968, when she was only 16, her family moved to New York. Before they leave, Morgan and her friends organize one last outing to say goodbye on the Sunset Strip. That night, the streets were full of life. Hundreds of people walked, sang, and danced in a festive and carefree atmosphere. However, in the middle of the crowd, Rod appeared. Seeing him, a shiver ran through her body and fear invaded her, but she decided to ignore it and focus on enjoying that last night. A while later, her friends came over and said, "Come on, let's all go to IHOP. You want?" Without much thought, Morgan got in the car. Her friend Mike was on one side, her friend Evie on the other, and she was in the middle. But then, to her horror, Rod climbed into the driver's seat. Fear paralyzed her. She hadn't shared with her friends what had happened in the alley that night. As the car sped toward the restaurant, Morgan fought her instinct to flee and the need to stay calm, convincing herself that everything was okay. Morgan got up to go to the bathroom, and as she passed a payphone, she remembered her father's advice. Always put a dime in her shoes so she could call for help if she got into trouble. She held the coin in her hand, hesitating, but ultimately decided not to call. She wanted to be with her friends and continue to believe that everything was okay. If she could go back in time, though, she would have dialed that number. When she returned to the table, Rod announced that he would take them back. Morgan, silent, hoped it would end there. She climbed into the car once more, trying to calm herself, but on the way back to the strip, Rod unexpectedly turned and parked in front of a house. With an eerie smile, he told Morgan and his friends, "Come on in, guys. We're going into a party." Morgan's friends were fascinated by the idea. The music was loud and the house was full of people chatting animatedly. But Morgan, feeling uncomfortable, avoided standing still and paced back and forth, staying alert. At one point, she was separated from her friends for only a few seconds, and Rod suddenly appeared, grabbing her tightly. Before she could react, he dragged her into his bedroom and pushed her to the floor. Rod locked the door and secured a metal bar in its supports, blocking any escape attempts. As Morgan backed up to the wall, trying to put on a brave front, he warned her that he couldn't hold her there. However, Rod brutally punched her in the face, making it clear that he had no intention of letting her go. Afterward, he pulled out a knife and slashed her across the neck. As Rod put the knife down to remove his pants, Morgan turned her attention to it, thinking that if she could just reach it, she could defend herself. However, he attacked her before she could move, raping her as she struggled desperately. Devastated and terrified, Morgan felt as if she was falling into a dark pit, praying for it all to end. Meanwhile, her friends noticed that she was missing. They banged on the bedroom door, but the loud music prevented the others from hearing what was happening. Rod, enraged, violently attacked Morgan, who was on the verge of losing consciousness. Suddenly, the window shattered into 1,000 pieces. His friend Mike had managed to get in. Rod, naked from the waist down, told them to take her and quickly ran out of there. Morgan ran out into the street, barely covered by a torn and bloody blouse. Mike quickly caught up with her and begged her to get help, but she refused. The idea of facing her parents with such a devastating truth would be very traumatic for the entire family. Morgan agreed to go to her friend Mike's house for care. A patrol car arrived shortly after, although she was not sure who had called him. However, she did not want to talk to him, fearing that her parents would find out what had happened. Her refusal to cooperate led the officer to leave. When they finally moved to New York, Morgan was no longer the same girl. The joy and confidence she used to have had disappeared, leaving in its place sadness, silence, and worry. Her parents attributed her condition to the change of life and the nostalgia of leaving her friends in California. It was October 1968, and Morgan had been trying for weeks to bury the memory of the attack that had scarred her, when she received an unexpected letter from one of the girls present that night. When she opened it, a newspaper clipping fell to the floor. Rodney Alcala had brutally attacked an 8-year-old girl. Guilt overwhelmed her. She felt that by not reporting Rod that night, she had allowed it to happen again. She blamed herself for not having spoken to her parents, for not having done something, for not having confronted him. Desperate, she tried to contact someone in Los Angeles, but she did not know who to look for. Uncertainty and remorse tormented her. That girl became a recurring ghost in her dreams, nameless and faceless, but omnipresent. Rodney Alcala, the man Morgan knew only as Rod, began appearing in every newspaper she could find. However, there was no news of his capture. He seemed to have vanished. What Morgan didn't know was that Rodney had also traveled to New York. In 1971, 3 years after the attack on Morgan, 2 young men walked into a post office in New Hampshire, less than 300 miles from where Morgan lived. An FBI most wanted poster on the wall behind the counter. Among the photos, they recognized a man they knew as John Berger, but his real name was Rodney Alcala. Alarmed, they notified authorities, leading to Alcala's capture. He had traveled across the country, changed his name, and gotten a job as a counselor at an exclusive camp for teenage girls. Disturbingly, it was discovered that he was also dating the daughter of the camp owner. It was clear that Rodney would not stop. On August 12, 1971, Rodney Alcala was arrested, and Detective Steve Hodel believed the case was solved, convinced that he had managed to get Alcala off the streets for good. However, the reality turned out to be very different. Alcala was charged with kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder, supported by physical evidence found in his home, multiple eyewitnesses, and the victim's identification. Despite this, the case collapsed due to the absence of a key witness. The 8-year-old girl was unable to testify. Rodney Alcala was offered a plea deal. He agreed to plead guilty to child molestation in exchange for a reduction in his sentence. However, the sentence handed down by the judge shocked everyone: 1 year to life in prison. This meant that Alcala could be released at any time after serving about 12 months. In August 1974, after just 34 months in prison, he was released. On June 20, 1979, 5 years after his release from prison, Rodney Alcala is back on the move. 12-year-old Robin Samso and her friend Bridget are enjoying somersaults in Huntington Beach when a man approaches. Posing as a professional photographer, he offers to take their photos, a common tactic for Alcala to lure his victims by posing as a legitimate photographer looking for models for magazines. While the man is taking their photos, a neighbor, concerned about the situation, approaches the girls to check on them. As soon as Rodney sees him, he starts running. Bridget lends Robin her bike so she won't be late for her ballet class. However, an hour later, Robin's mother, Mary Ann, receives a disturbing call from the ballet studio. Her daughter had not shown up for class. Alarmed, Mary Ann contacts Bridget, the last person to see Robin, and discovers that a strange man had approached them that day. The police are notified immediately, and Bridget collaborates with a sketch artist to create a sketch of the suspect. The sketch is quickly distributed to the media, sparking an intense search to locate the mysterious man. On July the 2nd, 12 days after her disappearance, Robin's body is discovered in the foothills of the Sierra Madre, more than 40 miles from where she was last seen. Robin's mother, Mary Ann, is devastated. The loss of her daughter has changed her forever. Los Angeles is reeling from the brutal murder of Robin Samsoe, while the police face the challenge of finding a suspect. In the midst of the investigation, Detective Jenkins of the police department, despite exhaustion after an 18-hour workday, decides to take a break, planning to investigate the suspect the next day. However, as he tries to unwind at home in front of the television, something stops him in his tracks. In a rerun of The Dating Game, Rodney Alcala appears as one of the main contestants, introduced as a successful photographer. The suspect's face stares back at him from the screen, confirming that he is the most wanted suspect. Detective Jenkins is stunned to realize that the man on television, casually participating in a dating show, is the same one featured in the composite portrait in the case. With certainty, he identifies Rodney Alcala as the suspect and immediately contacts the police department to inform the sergeant. However, he can't help but be overcome by a nagging concern. The show was recorded a year earlier, meaning that Alcala has been active and unrestrained for all that time. On July 24th, 1979, police finally arrested Rodney Alcala for the murder of Robin Samsoe. Amazingly, all this time, he had been hiding in plain sight, residing in his mother's home, just a few feet from where the girl's body was found. Using a search warrant, police searched the home of Rodney Alcala's mother, where he lived. Although they fail to find forensic evidence that directly links him to the murder of Robin Samsoe, they discover a receipt for a storage unit in Seattle. Upon inspection, they find over 1,000 photographs of girls and boys that featured explicit images. In the storage unit, they also discover various pieces of jewelry, including an assortment of earrings. Among them, a pair of gold ball earrings, identical to the ones Robin Samsoe was wearing on the day of her disappearance. This evidence becomes a direct link between Rodney Alcala and the murdered girl. On April 30th, 1980, the jury delivers its verdict. Rodney Alcala is found guilty and sentenced to death. However, to the dismay of Robin's family, the unimaginable happens. Just 4 years later, his sentence is overturned. The death penalty was reinstated, bringing relief to the family. However, in 2001, an unexpected twist occurred. Rodney's death sentence was overturned once again, plunging the family back into the horrors of trial. Investigator Matt Murphy decided to review the evidence, particularly a bag of jewelry recovered from the Seattle storage facility, for DNA. After the reversal of his conviction was approved, Rodney Alcala was awaiting his third trial, unaware that forensic science had advanced. Entering his DNA into the database, Murphy, along with police in California and New York, began searching for matches in unsolved cases. What they discovered was far more shocking than they anticipated. Alcala's DNA linked him to 4 women who were murdered. In 2010, 9 years after Rodney Alcala's conviction was overturned, his third trial finally concludes. This time, she faces charges not only for the murder of Robin Samsoe, but for a total of 5 murders in California state court. However, one witness will surprise everyone in the courtroom: the 8-year-old girl who survived the Alcala attack in 1968. During the trial, the survivor recounted what she remembered from that day. She was walking to school when Rodney stopped his car next to her and offered her a ride. At first, she refused, remembering her parents' warnings about not talking to strangers. However, he persisted, assuring her that he was not a stranger and that he knew her family. Finally, she agreed to get in the car. Rodney drove her home. What the little girl didn't know at the time was that 2 guardian angels would intervene to save her. Donald Haynes, a good Samaritan, witnessed the scene. Seeing the car stop and the interaction with the girl, he decided to follow it to Alcala's home. Acting quickly, he called the police. Officers arrived on the scene and, breaking protocol, rescued the girl. They removed a metal bar he had placed in her neck, ensuring her survival while Alcala fled. Thanks to Haynes's bravery and quick police intervention, that 8-year-old girl was sitting on the stand testifying. There is someone who follows the trial more intensely than most: Morgan. From her home, when she watches Tali, the brave 8-year-old who survived Rodney Alcala. Watching her testify with such courage, tears fill Morgan's eyes. I blamed myself for a long time, she admits. I wanted to contact her, but I felt immense guilt. I thought she would hate me. I spent days trying to write something perfect, just to apologize to her. Finally, I sent the letter. Tali responded with words that would change Morgan's life. There is nothing to forgive. I don't hold you responsible for what happened to me. That forgiveness was a turning point for Morgan. When they finally met, she confessed to him, "For years I have dreamed of hugging you. Is that okay with you?" Tali simply replied, "Yes." And then Morgan hugged her tightly, not wanting to let go. "It was wonderful," she recalls emotionally. On March 9, 2010, the trial for the 5 murders committed by Rodney Alcala in California, including that of 12-year-old Robin Samso, came to an end. The jury issued its verdict, guilty of murder. After 3 decades of waiting, the victims' families found a fulfillment of justice. The jury also determined the sentence: death penalty for Rodney James Alcala. Following Rodney Alcala's conviction, authorities released 120 photographs recovered from his Seattle locker. Their goal was to identify potential victims and solve missing persons cases. In 2015, Kathy Thornton saw those images and recognized her sister Christine, who had disappeared 39 years earlier. After a decades-long search, Kathy finally got answers and was able to bring closure to her sister's case. The serial killer, known as the dating game killer, Rodney Alcala, has finally passed away in prison. The world is now a little safer. Before you go, you can explore all 120 photographs via the link in the description. Our hope is that more victims will be identified and that their families will finally find some peace in their lives. If you believe justice has been served, don't forget to like and hit the bell so you don't miss any more cases. Until next time.